Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. Age 5. I recall my family living in Bartow, Florida, on land owned by my grandfather. I recall being sick with a childhood ailment and being put to bed by my mother. My sleeping quarters consisted of a little cot next to a south-facing window, with sunshine flowing through the glass and generating a beautiful glow on the floor. I was lying there, exhausted and dizzy, watching the dust particles dance in the light. I was particularly interested in the color of the suspended dust particles. I saw that they started out silvery and eventually turned golden. The golden glow spreads its beauty over the room. I'm standing at the edge of the orange grove in our backyard in an instant. I had no idea that my body was still sleeping inside the house. When I looked in the mirror, I saw that I still had my 5-year-old body. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to me. I'd been in our backyard many times before, so this was nothing out of the ordinary. As I began to glance about, I observed something odd in the middle of the orange orchard. A big mountain sprung out of the grove, with gorgeous inlaid steps soaring to the heavens. This amazing picture drew my eye, and I wanted to investigate this intriguing characteristic. In an instant, I'm at the bottom of the mountain, starting up the stairs. As I ascended further, I noticed a spectacular sight from the peak's summit. An array of light beams flowed from the top. They were shining the most magnificent light towards the starry heavens. I was so taken with the sight that all I wanted to do was climb to the top and join the light. As I climbed the stairs, I observed that people were stationed at each step. They were adorned in lovely flowing clothes that changed color all the time. The people were lovely to look at, but their compassion paled in comparison to the bright light above. I felt I was on a quest to reach that light. People formed a V-shaped wedge in front of me when I approached the halfway point on my way up. A man stepped from the formation toward me at the apex of this configuration. He glanced at me and told me I needed to turn around and go back the way I came. I told him I didn't want to return. I desired to ascend the mountain and enter the light. He reminded me once more that I needed to go back to where I came from. I got frustrated and tried to run through his legs. He was aware of my aims and obstructed my path. The man stated emphatically that I did not belong here yet and that I needed to return home. I descended the steps with a heavy heart. I peered up toward the light at the bottom of the stairs once again. I wished I could be in the light. Age 10, on Saturday, October 19, 1957, my family and the Gresham family planned to celebrate my 10th birthday in Lake Jackson State Park. The park is located just outside of Lake Jackson, Texas. The weather was lovely and the kids were having a fantastic time running about in the park. Our parents had already told us to avoid the main road that ran through the park. We had all assured our parents that we would not cross the street. We strolled through the park, taking in everything that piqued our interest. We eventually found ourselves near the road we'd been warned about. One of our group members advised crawling via a massive drainage culvert that went beneath the road. We agreed on this strategy and began crawling through. We all made it through the culvert safely. However, on my way through, I came upon a spider which terrified me. I was terrified of spiders since my mother often told us as kids about being bitten by a black widow spider. We paused on the other side of the road for a few moments before returning through the culvert. The other kids were unconcerned by the spider and easily made their way back through. I figured if I rushed across the road, I'd be able to beat the others to the other side. Because I was frightened of going down a spider-infested culvert, I decided it was the best course of action. I dashed across the street without watching for oncoming vehicles. Bam! I was knocked out of this world in an instant after being hit on the left side of my body by a force so intense. My range of vision changed from trees and sky with gorgeous clouds to solid white light the moment I was hit. In an instant, my world turned from natural to magnificent. I awoke to the sobs of my friends and family after the accident. And in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, I noticed my mother's frightened expression. I was given a sequence of events that lasted with me even when I was in the land of white light the multiple times I awoke. The succession of events left me with the idea that my family did adore me. My brothers had been harsh and cruel to me up until the accident, and I had the impression that they did not want me in the family. Later, I discovered that I had been in a coma for 11 days and had remained in the region of light during that period. I felt whole and at ease there. It was not a static environment. There was a lot going on. I was aware that I was loved and cared for. Some may believe that my childhood description of the place of light represents the soul's final resting place. That's not the case. I ultimately returned to my life and family, knowing that one day I will return to the glory of light. I'd been living and working in Fort North, Texas for almost a year. On weekends, I entertained myself by going down to the local airfield to practice flying. With over 100 flying hours under my belt, I was rather confident in my abilities to pilot a Cessna 152. It had been the practice plane of choice. It was late March and the weather in North Texas was still cold and nice. I prefer to fly in cooler air since it is denser and more conducive to flight. My job required a 4 to 10 setup. This meant we had Friday off, which I appreciated because it gave me more time to fly. Around 9 a.m., I walked down to the airfield and chartered one of the Cessna 152s for flight practice. My intention for the day's flight practice was to complete altitude departure stalls, which are typically done at 4,500 feet. I took off from the field and headed towards the practice area. I had flown to 2,500 feet and chose to reduce the plane's speed from 100 to roughly 60 miles per hour. This was to the rotation speed used while performing a departure stall. I had to employ 10 degrees of flaps to increase drag and slow the plane down from its initial speed to obtain this speed. Pilots practice departure stalls in preparation for the real thing. In this story, I'm using the term rotation quite loosely. I believe it's a term that refers to the spin that occurs as the pilot travels down the runway for takeoff. When the pilot reaches the design speed, the plane is able to overcome drag and achieve liftoff. This speed is 54 knots for the Cessna 152. Once this speed is attained, the pilot releases the yoke and the plane takes off. The definition of departure stall is when the plane leaves the runway and the angle of attack on the wing is so great that the airflow over the wing is lost. The plane is considered to stall when this happens. Simply put, if you do not take the prompt correction action, you will fall from the sky. The remedial technique is to move the yoke forward, causing the plane's nose to point downward. If you have adequate altitude, the increased airflow over the wing will put you back in command of the aircraft. With God's help, I pray you live to soar another day. As a result, pilots always practice departure stalls at safe heights. As I previously stated, I had slowed the plane down to rotation speed of 60 miles per hour. Once I reached this speed, I pulled back the yoke to spill the airflow from the wing, causing the wing to shake and eventually stall. Instead of the planned stall, the plane veered sharply to the right, sending the nose into a corkscrew spin. To recover from the spin, I immediately used counter rotation as a corrective move. However, my process did not work, and the earth was speeding toward me at 120 knots. I immediately had a severe headache in the center of my forehead. The agony and pressure seemed like a quarter, and then it erupted, and I heard the words, "Let go. You don't have enough response time for that." Hearing the words, I deduced that my mind was informing me that I had purchased the farm. For a minute, I fought the idea of relinquishing control. I let go of the controls and sat down with my hands in my lap, waiting for the crash. In the few microseconds I had left on Earth, I understood I had completely succumbed to the forces beyond my control for the first time. The only recognizable remorse I had at the time was for the plane's safety. What a shame to harm such a great gadget, I thought. My thoughts were traveling at the speed of light, and I knew with confidence that my life was coming to an end. I could see the birds soaring around on the tops of the trees that I was going to hit as I stared at the earth racing up at me. As I continued to watch the drama develop, I saw the plane's rotation slowing. The spin finally gave place to a gradually expanding arc, which eventually attained straight-line geometry. Immediately after entering straight and level flight, the jet proceeded to climb to an altitude of 850 feet. At this height, I reapplied my hands and feet to the controls. When I regained control of the plane, I looked around for the first time and recognized what had caused the snap roll. I peered down between the seats and noted that the wings still had 10 degrees of flaps. I immediately cleared this issue and restored control of the plane's operational surfaces. I kept practicing stalls for another 30 minutes. I was sick of it, so I returned to the airfield to land and secure the plane. The second error was to be at a dangerous height of 2,500 feet, rather than the permitted 4,500 feet. I entered the flight office, approached the head flying instructor, and recounted what had just occurred. The main instructor said I was fortunate to be alive. I was fortunate that the plane was able to fly out of the spin due to the low altitude of 2,500 feet, he said. Before practicing stalls, pilots must be at a height of 4,500 feet, according to the Federal Aviation Administration. I saw my legs trembling as I walked to my car. I pushed open the automobile door and slid into the driver's seat. I started the car and waited for it to warm up before driving away. As I sat there, I noticed how weak my legs were. I was apprehensive about my driving ability. I felt energized, like if I were high on coffee. I realized I needed to unwind. Perhaps a couple cold beers would help. I drove out of the parking lot and onto the freeway after approximately 10 minutes. I pulled over to a convenience store and bought a 6-pack of beer. I drove to my Fort Worth apartment and parked my car. With my cold drink in hand, I walked into my house, unlocked the door, entered, and then shut the door behind me. I emptied all but one beer, walked over to the couch and sat. I opened the beer, poured a big drink, then another, and another. After I finished the first, I went back to the fridge for another cold brew before returning to the sofa. I felt relaxed, but still highly alert after 3 beers. My thoughts were flying back and forth as I reflected on the events of the day before. I began to see the events through a different lens, one that was more philosophical in nature. I saw the events through the lens of control, how we humans go about our lives believing we have control, only to discover that our power has vanished in a second and that nothing we can do will offer us with the certainty of our actions that we seek. I considered how individuals give lip service to the concept of surrender. Religious people are constantly talking about surrendering to friends, neighbors, and ultimately to God. No one can surrender until our Creator is ready to receive us. If a guy believes he's surrendering, he is mistaken, since this is not God's definition of surrender. Only God can cause the submission necessary for a soul to be humble before its creator. The circumstances of the time brought me to surrender on the plane when I had no control over my life. I yielded to the concept of death at that precise time, and God provided me a new continuation of life. In some ways, I felt as if I had died and been resurrected. I've never been so alert in my life. It took 3 days for me to calm down enough to sleep well.